Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, March 1st, 2019. Happy March. Welcome to it. We'll see whether we're in for a wild ride for the entirety of March. Will it just be today? Will taking off for the weekend fix everything for Donald Trump? I don't know. We got a lot on our plates today. Nothing that you didn't know wasn't going to be there, quite honestly. I can't see how anyone would have missed this at this point. But, well, gee whiz, lots to catch up on. Michael Cohen testimony still being talked about. Of course, he gave more testimony yesterday. We're not entirely certain exactly what went on there because it was taking place behind closed doors in the House Intelligence Committee. But many people still talking about the open hearings. And, of course, more open hearings to come. And, well, gee, Josh, there's just a whole lot happening here, including a fuller picture. I guess this is really the story of the morning, really the story of the entire administration at this point. Everybody's talking about the New York Times, which we can't read. I'm sorry, everybody. I can't tell you the big story of the morning about Jared Kushner and his security clearance because I'm boycotting the New York Times. So, sorry. Should we do that, or should we talk about the story? We don't necessarily have to read the story. Do we necessarily have to pay for the story? Can't we just make it one of the first 10 stories of March and leave it at that? We could. That's true. I hadn't thought about it all the way through. We were just winging it at the time. But that's the big story of the year, morning, decade, century, entirety of the history of the American Republic. The New York Times piece headlined, of course, Trump ordered officials to give Jared Kushner a security clearance because it's entirely necessary for him to have a security clearance because he has to steal all the money. And if you don't know where all the money is and you can't order people to let you take it because you haven't got a security clearance, I don't know what's the point of being president, quite honestly. So that's the story. Maggie Haberman, Michael Schmidt, everyone's favorites on the top of the byline there. Also Adam Goldman and Annie Carney. And why don't we just get right to it, shall we? President Trump ordered his chief of staff, not his current acting chief of staff, but his previous adult-in-the-room chief of staff who was going to fix everything with his bravery. President Trump ordered his chief of staff to grant his son-in-law and senior advisor, believe it or not, Jared Kushner, a top-secret security clearance last year, overruling concerns flagged by intelligence officials and the White House's top lawyer. 4 people briefed on the matter said. Now, to be clear, before we go any further into the story, everyone knew this. The new piece of information is that the then Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, wrote it down and said, this sucks, this is BS, I shouldn't have to do this, but I'm being forced to award this security clearance over the objections of everybody who's involved with it. Of course, that would fall almost entirely to the CIA in our current system. But as you know, from discussing this issue before, ultimately security clearances really are actually up to the president. So this is not, strictly speaking, a matter of illegal activity. It's simply, this is a very interesting, it's a terrific time in history. What a great teaching moment. I mean, it's the end of history, so that's bad. But the good news is you can catch up now if you've been behind on things. Security clearances are a fiction of the state and are a necessity of doing business in the executive branch, and it is the idea of having security clearances and the process for awarding security clearances ultimately is derived from presidential authority. So at bottom, really what has happened here is the whole mechanism of security clearances, state secrets, who can see them, who can't, and how they are awarded, all derives from the president's personal authority in his capacity as a constitutional officer. In practice, of course, it's awfully hard to keep track of all the people who are supposed to have security clearances or who are seeking security clearances. And it would otherwise occupy the entirety of the president's life, and he still wouldn't get through all the work figuring out who should have security clearance, what should be classified, at what level of secrecy, etc., etc. So he delegates that inherent authority to others, to a bureaucracy, which has been worked out over time by that bureaucracy and with the approval of Congress and occasionally through legal proceedings or litigation, ratification of the various mechanisms in the courts. The idea basically being that by presidential authority, for top secret clearance like Kushner was seeking, the CIA is granted the authority to review a record developed by the Justice Department and the FBI and a federal background investigative service bureau to evaluate the results of that and make a final determination on whether or not you get that top security clearance, with the understanding that it was reviewable ultimately by the president, but that there was a political control layer involved in that up to this point in the entire history of the country, although we didn't have the same mechanism for most of the history of the country, but the modern history of the country, the political fail-safe in all this was, what if the president were to seek to give a security clearance to someone wholly undeserving for nefarious reasons or otherwise? If all that authority derives from the president, what's to stop him from doing that? And the answer is politics. It's supposed to be so embarrassing, so politically damaging to ignore the advice of the entire investigative, to ignore the entire investigative outcome and to ignore the determination of our top intelligence officials should set you so at odds with the American public's concept of faithful execution of national security duties that you would never dare to do such a thing. However, Donald Trump does dare to do such a thing and did dare to do such a thing, and we're all standing around saying, but that's against the rules, right? Some of us probably standing around saying that's probably against the law even. It's not against the law. It's just against the rules, and who cares about those? And that's basically where we stand. Now, the fact that Kushner got the security clearance despite the strong concerns of the intelligence community and everybody who knows all the already known public facts about him was also a known quantity. Everybody knew that this was the case. What we had in between finding out, that he had that security clearance, and everybody had to assume that he did have it, in order for him to be even attempting to do the work that he had laid on his plate, I guess. And it's not a bad expression to say it was laid at his feet, basically. So everybody knew that he was working with some sort of functional clearance. And I believe we've read on the air before, or we've certainly noted on the air before, the reporting that says that Kushner is the single biggest consumer of top secret level intelligence in the White House. The president isn't reading any. He leaves that to Jared Kushner. So the biggest volume of American national security secrets being read by anyone, or being requested anyway, by any White House official has been going to Jared Kushner for a long time. We also have, of course, read the reporting that alleges that, I guess it hasn't been proven yet, so I guess it is still alleging that it was Kushner who provided to Mr. Bonesaw, MBS in Saudi-owned Arabia, the list of enemies of his personal, what shall we say, rulership, or, I guess rulership in the stead of the king here as crown prince, but who came up with the list of people that MBS eventually opted to arrest and imprison in a Ritz-Carlton hotel, mind you, but imprison nonetheless. And apparently some of those people have been tortured, otherwise mistreated, turned up dead, never been heard from again, etc., etc. Lots of fun things that happen to you when you're put under house arrest in Saudi Arabia. And it was speculated early on that it was an American intelligence product that Jared Kushner, in his private dealings, in his WhatsApp texting with MBS, in his secret visits to MBS, in his midnight to 4 a.m. discussions with MBS, turned this information over to him. We are also, of course, reminded of the many times we heard about Jared Kushner's inexplicable but strong desire for the Russians, for some reason, to provide him with secure, unmonitored communications links to Moscow, so that, specifically for the purpose of his being able to communicate with top Russian officials without American intelligence officials becoming aware of either that communication or the content of it. That's an odd pairing with a top secret security clearance, of course. And it's probably striking a lot of you at this point that it's awfully upsetting to have lived through an election during which one side was represented by this behavior, or at least the potential for this behavior, now come to fruition. And the instead the unified and unfailing gaze of the reporters covering the election on a potential problem that never materialized, an unbreached private email server maintained by Hillary Clinton some years in the past while working as Secretary of State in the Barack Obama administration. Again, some years ago. But somehow her emails, you know the story. I don't have to remind you of it, but I think it's worth noting before we plow on with the story here. Okay, let's go back and do that. Back to the New York Times. We only got through one paragraph there. Mr. Trump's decision in May so troubled senior administration officials that at least one, the White House chief of staff at the time, John F. Kelly, wrote a contemporaneous, it's becoming a favorite word, contemporaneous, along with purported, contemporaneous internal memo about how he had been, quote, ordered, unquote, to give Mr. Kushner the top secret clearance. The White House counsel at the time, Donald F. McGahn II, to give the full name, because that's what the New York Times likes to do, also wrote an internal memo outlining the concerns that had been raised about Mr. Kushner, including by the CIA, that's the key player here, and how Mr. McGahn had recommended that he not be given a top secret security clearance. The disclosure of the memos contradicts statements made by the president, who told the New York Times in January in an Oval Office interview that he had no role in his son-in-law receiving his clearance. Once again, this has been another episode of How to Read a Trump Comment, trademark David Waldman, 2000, let's say 18 to that one. I don't think I started that before, early 2018. But once again, Trump tells you he had no role in giving his son-in-law his security clearance. That means he 100% had a role in giving his son that security clearance. I believe also in heavy circulation in Twitter is a television interview given by Ivanka Trump, during which she says exactly the same thing. My father had zero input on the security clearance, both for me and for Jared. And, well, that, according to the contemporaneous memos to file, both from Kelly and McGahn, is apparently a bald-faced lie. However, I guess there's always room for the possibility that she knows nothing about it, and I guess somehow, I mean, among the many possibilities that we consider in this weird multiverse in which we appear to live, there's some possibility that Donald Trump did, in fact, both order that Kushner be granted a security clearance and have no idea that the president intervened in any way that was improper in granting that security clearance. That could mean as little as I did it, but I didn't know it was a problem. It could mean as much as I did it and I have no memory of it because I'm in mental collapse. And it could mean something in the middle, which is I did it, I remember doing it, I'm lying about doing it to cover it up. I don't know which of the two actually is the more serious condition of those last two, but it's probably one of them. Mr. Kushner's lawyer, who used to be known as the only competent one of the stable of lawyers kept among them, Abby Lowell, said that at the time that the clearance was granted last year, his client went through a standard process. I mean, and again, be very careful the way you read these things. I guess one of the other takeaways from the Michael Cohen testimony the other day was in his answers to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I believe. Is that who was questioning him? It may, and I may be mixing it up again with the Katie Hill questioning, but there was a question put to him about, I think it must have been Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, because it was about, I think about the checks, the reimbursements. And she was just, whoever it was asking, in interviews given in previous years, Cohen had stated that he had not been reimbursed in any way for the payments to Stormy Daniels, in this case, by either the Trump campaign or the Trump organization. And he was asked, is that true? And he said, well, it is true. That is to say, that statement is not false because he had been reimbursed personally by Donald Trump. But he said right there in his answer Wednesday that that was a very carefully constructed statement. It was meant to sound like a categorical denial, but it was not. And I really kind of thought, actually it was kind of a surprise, not that it had been done that way, but that Michael Cohen would resort to such a thing. I really thought that Michael Cohen and the Trumps just operated plain on, who cares if you're lying? A lot of times you find careful and caring, even if they're, a-holes otherwise, they care about themselves. You often find politicians crafting these kinds of strangely worded responses, the idea of which is to make it sound like a categorical denial, but it in fact is plausible deniability later on. I was never reimbursed by the Trump organization or the Trump campaign. But I was reimbursed by Donald Trump himself, which is, a different person, not either one of these entities. And I carefully constructed that so that it would still be true, but also possibly get me off the hook. I really thought that Michael Cohen and Donald Trump mostly operated on the level of just say, I was never reimbursed by anybody, period. And if they find out you're lying later, you say, well, I was lying. I mean, that's what I do. But I'm put in mind of that, and I'm wondering whether Abby Lowell, I think, is the kind of person who would much prefer to live with a carefully constructed but technically true statement. That would be par for the course for a competent attorney with a shady client who's trying their best not to get themselves in too much trouble here. Again, that statement. That at the time the clearance was granted last year, his client, Kushner, went through a standard process. Yes, he went through a standard process. He failed the standard process. It was the exceptional and extraordinary orders of the president that brought him to the point we're at today, where he's holding a top secret security clearance. So just watch that one. Be aware of that. Again, Kushner's lawyer, Abby Lowell, said at the time that the clearance was granted last year, his client went through a standard process. Ivanka Trump, the president's eldest daughter and Mr. Kushner's wife, said the same thing 3 weeks ago, and I don't know if that's really true. They might be pointing to the interview. There's a link there. They might be pointing to a quote derived from the same interview I've seen circulating on Twitter, but let me take a look at it. That's a Maggie Haberman piece also, all by herself on that one. Trump's oldest daughter, who serves as a senior advisor in the White House, denied on Friday that her father was involved in issuing security clearances for her or her husband, Jared Kushner. Ivanka Trump made the remarks during an interview with the ABC News host Abby Huntsman, which was problematic in its own way, in an interview for The View. There were anonymous leaks about there being issues, Ms. Trump said, but the president had no involvement pertaining to my clearance or my husband's clearance. Zero. That's a different statement. That is a totally different statement. Asked what had delayed her security clearance as well as the clearance for Mr. Kushner, Ms. Trump replied there weren't any other than a backlog that exists of close to 1 million clearances across government. That is a very different statement and a very different kind of, that's a lie, versus the Abby Lowell statement, which says he went through a standard process. Again, they both went through a standard process. The standard process did not result in a clearance for them. Therefore, they needed the extraordinary process. What worries me, actually, maybe most on this point, what worries me most is President Trump gives out security clearances to his relatives who have no business having them, and they trade on those security clearances probably for personal profit, but almost assuredly for personal power to which they're not entitled. But as troubling, but a separate issue, I suppose. Again, Maggie Haberman writes this piece February 8th, it's not that long ago, saying very clear, she gets the stenography right. Ivanka says to Abby Huntsman that there was zero involvement. The president had no involvement pertaining to my clearance or my husband's clearance. Zero. Now we find out, of course, that Kelly and McGahn both say the president ordered it. That would, of course, be involvement. And a non-zero level, Ivanka's wrong. That's a lie. Maggie Haberman should know that. But Maggie Haberman today, along with the others in the New York Times, or yesterday, along with the others in the New York Times, reports that Ivanka Trump said the same thing 3 weeks ago that Abby Lowell said now, which is not true. I mean, if it was Ivanka Trump writing the article, I would say it's a lie. Maggie Haberman / Ivanka Trump lied to us. But I'm afraid it's just a mistake. But it's an enormous mistake. This is huge. I'm surprised I'm not seeing more discussion about it. And maybe it's because I'm ignoring Twitter and doing a radio show instead. Abby Lowell merely says that at the time the clearance was granted last year, his client went through a standard process. That's a bad construction of what they're trying to do. At the time the clearance was granted, his client went through a standard process. It's really a more accurate thing. At the time that the clearance was granted, his client had gone through a standard process and then another one. This is really blurs the line even a little more by, although it's not a direct quote, it's simply an attribution that his client went through a standard process. But even so, just staring you in the face right now, Maggie, is Abby Lowell's carefully parsed statement that says that Kushner went through a standard process, but also another one, and Ivanka Trump saying there was no extraordinary other process. Ivanka's claim is that the standard process is what resulted in the security clearance. Abby Lowell's claim is that a standard process took place at some point, and that's it. And that's actually fairly obvious on its face. I mean, I just read this thing 2 seconds ago along with you, and I was like, wait, that's not the same statement as the other one. I'm sure Maggie's busy, and there were other eyes on this. I mean, Michael Schmidt, Adam Goldman, and Annie Carney could have picked this up. Who knows who else has their name at the bottom of this piece as having contributed to the reporting. But it doesn't matter because they clearly nobody contributed to the reporting on this front. That this is left out of the story. Asked on Thursday, I guess we'll continue reading the story, even though, why? I mean, I guess it's pretty stupid at this point. Well, the whole story's messed up, but this is what we have to go on in this country. Asked on Thursday about the memos contradicting the president's account, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, why would you ask her, the White House press secretary, said, "We don't comment on security clearances." Oh, we don't? Because Ivanka does. Peter Mirajanian, I hope I have that right. Mirajanian. That's a long name. A spokesman for Mr. Lowell, we've tried it before, right? Because he's been spokesman for a while, said on Thursday, by the way, a spokesman for the spokesman, essentially. He's a busy lawyer, I know, but okay. A spokesman for Mr. Lowell said on Thursday, in 2018, how does he do this one? In 2018, White House and security clearance officials affirmed that Mr. Kushner's security clearance was handled in the regular process with no pressure from anyone. How about the extraordinary process? This is another one. That was conveyed to the media at the time, and news stories, if accurate, do not change what was affirmed at the time. He's practically putting it out there for you. He's just telling you right to your face what they did in their statement. They're not that stupid. The people in the Lowell shop, whichever firm that may be. All right. So the decision last year to grant Mr. Kushner a top secret clearance upgraded him from earlier temporary and interim status, also within the president's power to grant. He never received a higher level designation that would have given him access to need-to-know intelligence as sensitive compartmented information. Okay, so he doesn't have the top security. Honestly, by the way, could we work on getting that taxonomy straightened out? I think top secret ought to be the top level of secret. I don't know whether anybody else has that pet peeve, but no one's listening to me. If they did, they'd all be arrested. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Network Radio, here in my house, where we are on a 2-hour snow delay. I didn't even mention that today, so there'll be a little bit of background noise and probably a little bit of distraction as well. Not a bad snowfall. Kids disappointed that we didn't end up with a cancellation, and so am I. Quite honestly, it's a lot easier to deal with, and it would have been nice to have a Friday off, but we will take it. So breaks are spent dashing around, making sure everybody understands, what point of the day they're in. It's a little disorienting to have that 2-hour delay. It's a simple thing to deal with. Add 2 hours to everything, or subtract 2 hours to find out what time it would be on a normal day at this point in the process. But I don't know. For whatever reason, it creates difficulties. But everybody seems to be dealing with it just fine. Mostly just me worrying about these things more than anything else. So let's get back to the issue at hand, the national security kind of problem that we have. It is really amazing. And one thing I enjoy about, one thing that's great about doing the radio format is being able to just work this stuff out verbally, just blurt it out and work through it this way, rather than have to write it out long form. But I do miss also the ability to tweet some of this stuff out, and I feel like the morning discussion on Twitter, we don't get to be part of it except during breaks. It's very difficult to participate. I want to disseminate on Twitter this point that we're making about the way that Abby Lowell and spokesperson Peter Mirajanian are parsing this thing so carefully. And I mean, I may be misinterpreting it. I mean, Lowell and Marajanian might also just be lying their asses off. Or, I guess it's possible, they're telling the God's honest truth, and so is Ivanka, and we just all have the wrong story somehow. I just don't see how the facts line up with that, or how the claims line up with that. But, maybe the claims are wrong. That's a possibility, too. And we can maybe get to a story that helps illustrate some of that later on a different front. But anyway, I just think I think that there's really something here. I think that there are two very similar, carefully crafted statements here, and it makes sense that they would be, coming from this. They're coming from the same shop. These guys workshopped this stuff. Don't deny that there was, don't discuss the fact that there was some extraordinary process that followed the standard one. The best point we've got is that Jared and Ivanka went through a standard process. Don't discuss what happened in it. Just say it did happen. You won't be wrong. They can't say you lied. I mean, they will say you lied, and then you'll say, no, I misled. And that's a different thing. You won't get disbarred probably for that. If it pertained to you and your own personal case, you could get disbarred for being that misleading, I think. But in this case, no. You're just being a zealous advocate. It's someone else's job to find out, to divine from your statement that there's something missing on purpose. Sometimes you get away with that, and nobody is able to do that. On the other hand, I read this thing and in about 2 seconds saw, that there was this possibility, probably along with, I would say, 6 to 15 million other people in the country reading the article and thinking about it at the same time. But, none of them are thinking about it into a microphone. Aha. That's what makes us different. Also, I'm not working right now, and they're probably getting paid a lot of money. The decision last year to grant Mr. Kushner a top-secret clearance upgraded him from the earlier temporary and interim status. Right, I think we did read this one. But he didn't get the need-to-know intelligence level, sensitive compartmented information, which is a cool name and everything, and maybe they think that's cooler sounding than top secret, which sounds like it's from a cartoon. But the fact, they really have to straighten out the semantics of this stuff. They really don't, of course, and they don't care. It is not known precisely what factors led to the problems with Mr. Kushner's security clearance. Wink, wink. I mean, they can't legally tell you what they are definitively. They can only say what are alleged, and I guess that comes next. Officials had raised questions about his own and his family's real estate businesses ties to foreign governments and investors, and about initially unreported contacts he had with foreigners, which is a very gentle way of saying, what did he revise his security clearance application forms, 100 times? I didn't talk to any foreign governments or any foreign people at all. I had no contact with people of other nationalities. Oh wait, yes I did. 100+ times. That's awfully nice of them to put it that way. The issue also generated criticism of Mr. Trump for having 2 family members serve in official capacities in the West Wing, and that's a problem by itself. Mr. Kushner has spent this week abroad working on a Middle East peace plan. That also is very generous, but okay, that's what he's supposed to be doing. Among his meetings was one with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, / Mr. Bonesaw, and guy who ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and probably countless others. While the president has the legal authority to grant a clearance, we discussed this up at the top, in most cases the White House's Personnel Security Office makes a determination about whether to grant one after the FBI has conducted a background check. If there is a dispute in the Personnel Security Office about how to move forward, a rare occurrence, the White House counsel makes the decision. In highly unusual cases, the president weighs in and grants one himself. I guess that's kind of what happened here. It's not the normal process. It's a step beyond. It's 2 steps, maybe 3 steps beyond the normal process. And again, just to finish off, I guess, or supplement the discussion we had earlier about where the authority comes from and the political check on the authority, the construction of this outside delegated bureaucratic process for making the decisions is supposed to, on the surface, supposed to depoliticize the issue. That there are other people with other career considerations, many of whom have served multiple administrations regardless of party, making these decisions. And so therefore that's supposed to take the heat off the president if somebody gets one that, gets a clearance that shouldn't have. Well, it wasn't the president. This independent determination was made by professional staff who simply made a mistake. But, it should also be known that there's a certain amount of political pressure that can be brought to bear on them. They can be dismissed from their jobs, and they're usually nameless, faceless types that no one will really notice, and lots of excuses can be made up about why they were actually dismissed. And, of course, you can point to there being a disgruntled ex-employee if they come up with lame excuses like I was fired because I wouldn't give a security clearance to Jared Kushner and the president ordered me to and I wouldn't do it and I was fired, whatever. But when it's a high-profile person, or two of them, Don McGahn and John Kelly, who, of course, leave contemporaneous memos to the file, it's a little more difficult to live it down. But, in the LOL YOLO Nothing Matters Republican Party, without whose cooperation no serious repercussions that can actually result in removal from office will take place, LOL YOLO Nothing Matters. The rest of us, it matters for. So, in Mr. Kushner's case, personnel division officials were divided about whether to grant him a top secret clearance. Some people who take the job seriously said we should not. Others who took the job to serve Donald Trump personally said yes, we should. Basically is what happened there. In May of 2018, the White House counsel's office, which at the time was led by Mr. McGahn, recommended to Mr. Trump that Mr. Kushner not be given a clearance at that level. But the next day, Mr. Trump ordered Mr. Kelly to grant it to Mr. Kushner anyway, people familiar with the events said. The question of Mr. Kushner's access to intelligence was a flashpoint almost from the beginning of the administration. Actually, before I continue on with this, let me set up the possibility that there's another parsing going on somewhere. May 2018, McGahn recommends no clearance for Kushner. Next day, it says, Trump ordered Mr. Kelly to grant it to Mr. Kushner anyway. People familiar with the events said. Now, I have no doubt but that the order was given from, or at least that I have no doubt that they're trying to say, in speaking to Haberman and others, that the order was given from Donald Trump to John Kelly, get this done. But I wanted to sort of point out, we just had explained to us what the process is. I'm not certain that there's a part of the process in which it can be accurately described as dispositive to the situation, that the president orders the chief of staff to grant it. The chief of staff doesn't grant it. The chief of staff can pass on the order of the president to those who do grant it and say, your job's on the line, grant it or you're fired and we'll get somebody else to grant it. But this puts me in mind of another dodge, like somewhere along the line we'll all be outraged about this thing and we'll call Kelly in front of Congress and Kelly will be asked, did the president order you to grant the clearance? And, there's some possibility that he says no, which we're supposed to take to mean the president wasn't involved in this thing. Ivanka is right. And somehow my contemporaneous memo to the file is wrong. Now, he probably would have an interest in explaining how that could be, but he could just leave it at that if he's, if for whatever reason he's motivated to play games with whoever's interrogating him, whether it be the Congress or Mueller or anybody else. And then they would get huffy and angry and say, how come, give me one good reason why we shouldn't charge you with perjury right now or whatever, or obstruction of justice. And he could then answer, you asked me, did the president order me to grant the security clearance? No, he ordered me to order someone else to grant it. You see what I mean? Another parsing that could allow him to buy time, create problems, just try and walk that tightrope and hope that he doesn't get charged, but also that he somehow protects the president. I don't know whether he's still interested in doing that, but, it may be motivated by another reason. I don't want to get myself in trouble here. I don't really care what happens to the president, but it's best for me if at this point people come away with the mistaken impression that the president didn't convey orders to give Kushner a security clearance through me. But it's still a truthful answer. He did convey that order through me, but I'm going to give them an answer that makes them, that confuses them, that might make them think I'm a liar, but that they can't prove isn't true, because it is, but only in the most narrow sense. So just thought I'd put that one out there on the record too. So the question of Mr. Kushner's access to intelligence was a flashpoint almost from the beginning of the administration. The initial background check into Mr. Kushner dragged on for more than a year, creating a distraction for the White House, which struggled to explain why one of the people closest to the president had yet to be given the proper approval to be trusted with the country's most sensitive information. Also a generous statement of the issue. It gave people reason to wonder how safe our top secret information was if it was regularly being discussed by the president with someone not cleared to hear it and not cleared for some ostensibly good reason. That's what the problem is. Not that the White House was struggling to explain why he didn't have it yet. They weren't even trying to explain why he didn't have it yet. What was troubling was that they acted as if they didn't care, because they didn't. The full scope of intelligence officials' concerns about Mr. Kushner is not known, but the clearance had been held up in part over questions from the FBI, which does the investigations, and the CIA, which does the evaluation, about his foreign and business contacts, including those related to Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia, according to multiple people familiar with the events. For some reason, Saudi Arabia left off that list, but again, some weasel words here. I think everybody knows that Saudi Arabia is probably on that list, but maybe either the evidence for Saudi Arabia is somehow lacking in the record or weaker than others, or maybe Saudi Arabia's government has indicated a greater willingness to drag the New York Times into litigation than are the governments of the named entities here, Israel, UAE, and Russia. And they simply put it this way instead. They were worried about his foreign and business contacts, including those related to Israel, United Arab Emirates, and Russia. Also Saudi Arabia, that's included in there. But we just, we didn't name them. We're not lying. Again, we're not leaving them out for any particular reasons involving the factual the factual reality of their involvement. We're just looking to not get ourselves in trouble here. But yes, they are included. A clearer term often used by lawyers not interested in hiding the ball is including but not limited to. But that's very legalese, so I'm not surprised that journalists opt not to go with that, if that's what's going on here. During the 2016 presidential campaign, Mr. Kushner was part of a group that met with a Russian lawyer who went to Trump Tower claiming to have political dirt on Hillary Clinton. We know that person, Natalia Veselnitskaya, but I guess they have a character limit in this story. And during the presidential transition, Mr. Kushner had a meeting with the Russian ambassador at the time, Sergei Kislyak, and the head of the Russian state-owned bank. When he applied for security clearance, he did not reveal those meetings, and that's problematic, you see, for another level of problems. He later made several amendments to that section of his application known as the SF-86. I think we were trying to come up with that name the other day, talking to Greg. His aides at the time insisted he had omitted those meetings inadvertently. You can claim that. Mr. Kushner initially operated with a provisional clearance as his background check proceeded. Again, prerogative of the president. All of this authority derives from the president. So, you're not going to get a permanent one. Here, have a permanently temporary one. In an entry to Mr. Kushner's personnel file on September 15th, 2017, the head of the Personnel Security Division, Carl Klein, we read about him before, wrote, quote, "Per conversation with WH, White House, counsel, the clearance was changed to interim top secret until we can confirm that the DOJ, where the FBI resides, or someone else actually granted a final clearance. This action is out of an abundance of caution because the background investigation has not been completed." End quote. In a statement to the Times, when Mr. Kushner received the security clearance last year, Mr. Lowell said that, let's watch it here, quote, "His application was properly submitted," you're okay there, "reviewed by numerous career officials," you're okay there, "and underwent the normal process, period," end of quote. All true. It just doesn't describe the full range of what actually happened. It's a correct recounting of the first third of the events in chronological order that led to Kushner's security clearance. It just leaves the second 2/3 of it off. I mean, that happened. I didn't mention it, but I haven't lied to you. And you might think, but come on, how could that possibly work? To which I would say, I've just showed you that it worked. As between February 8th, when Maggie Haberman watched Huntsman interview Ivanka, and yesterday, she came away with the impression that Ivanka denied it, and that so did Abby Lowell. Abby Lowell did not deny that the president intervened. He simply didn't mention the president. Ivanka Trump denied that the president intervened. She's just not as skilled as Abby Lowell is. So I think, and it's not a separate instance of proving the same point. It's this, because I think that's just a restatement of things. Up at the top, they said, without using the direct quote from Lowell, that, or maybe it's a different version of the quote. I think they're talking about the same exchange here, just talking about it twice. I think that's the case. I'm pretty sure, but it wouldn't matter a great deal. Although I guess it would tend to say something different if on two occasions Abby Lowell gave the same dodge of an answer. Not very much. It doesn't say very much about Abby Lowell. It would just say more about the people who are talking to him. All right, back to the article. During a review of security clearances in February of 2018 that was prompted by the controversy surrounding Rob Porter. Remember him? Memory hold that guy. Then the White House staff secretary, Rob Porter was, who had been accused of domestic abuse. Mr. Kushner's clearance was downgraded from interim top secret to secret, limiting his access to classified information. At the time, Mr. Kelly wrote a 5-page memo revoking temporary clearances that had been in place since June 1st, 2017. That affected both Mr. Kushner and Ms. Trump, that's Ivanka, I guess she doesn't go by Ivanka Kushner, who told friends and advisors that they believed that Mr. Kelly and Mr. McGahn were targeting them for petty reasons instead of legitimate concerns flagged by officials. Here, I will pause to note what our own Scout Finch, Jen Hayden, said about this morning. pointing out, where is it? Here we are. Quoting or including the ABC News video of the exchange between Abby Huntsman and Ivanka Trump, in which she says, yeah, my father had zero involvement. Jen Hayden noting here, aside from the quite serious lie, I think we now know why there were so many reports that Jared and Ivanka were trying to get rid of John Kelly, who's probably the first person to ever tell them no. That may or may not be the case, but I think she's on to something there, and that's reflected right here in this paragraph in the Times. His 5-page memo revoking all temporary and interim security clearances, that affected the both of them, and they went around telling their friends and advisors that they thought Kelly and McGahn were targeting them for petty reasons, not legitimate ones. Sure, fine. I mean, that's what they would want their friends to think. Mr. Kushner and Ms. Trump both complained to the president about the situation. Dad. Current and former administration officials said, in Mr. Kushner's case, Mr. Trump would often turn to other aides and say in frustration, why don't you justice him? Why isn't this getting done? According to former administration official, or a former administration official, on at least one occasion, the president asked another senior official if the person could sort out the issue. That official said no, according to this account. And he can't. And that's a funny exchange, too, because I'm sure it didn't end there. But if it didn't, it's interesting that this isn't laid out. What could have happened here? What would have happened, I think, if things are normal. Pardon me for a second. Wow, big frog had to be expelled from the throat. Get out of here, Pepe. All right. What probably happened in that exchange, why isn't this getting done, right? Or on at least one occasion, presumably a different occasion from the why isn't this getting done. The president asked another senior official if the person could sort out the issue. So I guess Kelly's not doing it. McGahn's not doing it. So Ivanka, can you sort out this issue? No, I can't. I'm an idiot. I can't do that. I'm probably not her, but you never know. So can you sort out this issue? And the person says no. Now, you know that Trump's the kind of person that, no, what do you mean no? Don't tell me no. He could go motivational poster. I don't want to hear about why you can't do something. I want you to tell me how you can. Or he could, say, what the, beep, beep, bleepity bleep, God damn it, get this done. Why don't you just, blah, blah, blah. Kill the person whose job it is to approve these things and steal their stamp and just stamp it. And then roll them up in a carpet and give them to MBS. Why don't you just do that? And you can't just say no and have that be the end of the account. He's going to yell at you. And what might have happened if he spoke to somebody who knew what they were talking about, why would he do that, is, can you sort this issue out? No. But you can. I mean, I literally can't change. I do not have the authority to change this. And the person who I would have to yell at doesn't have to listen to me. And they won't believe me if I say they're going to be fired if they don't do it. They either need to hear it from you, or they need to hear that you've granted me the authority to fire them in some way. And that's not going to be believable. I'm not that person in the White House. But what's really at the bottom of all of this is I can't fix this, but you can. The whole national security clearance apparatus is derived from your power. You could do it. But I understand what you're saying to me without saying it is, but I am aware of and don't want to have to deal with that political check which exists that would make me look politically horrible if I personally intervened. I need someone else to intervene and deny to the press that they got the orders from me. Or find a way, if you won't deny it, if you're too much of a Boy Scout like Abby Lowell, to simply deny it, find a way to make it look like you're saying no, that you're denying it but don't deny it. If you're that kind of person who really cares about maintaining credibility and being able to say, yeah, I split hairs, that's how I did it, as opposed to saying, you caught me, F you, what are you going to do about it? That's the Trump role, both Ivanka and Donald and Don Jr. and I guess probably to some extent Eric, but he distances himself from having to do that. Very smart of him. He may end up being the smartest one after all, though he's being portrayed as the dumbest one. Interchangeable with Tiffany, who either could be a genius or is an idiot. I'm not sure which, but whichever one, it's working out really well for her. Barron doing very well, too, on that front, but I attribute that to his age. But he may be a genius, and more power to him if he realizes, yeah, I shouldn't be touching any of this. I got a truckload of money waiting for me. I don't need any more, so I'm not going to go to jail over getting another $10. So, he's like 11 or 12 years old. Anyway, so imagine that conversation. Why isn't this getting done? Because it's there are people there who independently hold their jobs and wield power, and I don't have the power to order them not to do it. You do, but I'm not going to tell the reporters that was part of the discussion, because then people will figure out what's really happening here a lot faster than I need them to. I need time to escape. So, there we are. Mr. Kelly did not believe it was appropriate to overrule the security clearance process and had brushed aside or avoided dealing with Mr. Kushner's requests, a former administration official said. That's why Kushner thinks he was targeting him. Mr. Kelly did not respond to a request for comment, so not being all that helpful here, I guess we're going to have to subpoena that guy. House Democrats are in the early stages of an investigation into how several Trump administration officials obtained clearances, including Mr. Kushner. That's good news. And the next paragraph begins with a discussion of Trump's precise language to Kelly. So let's save that for the other side of the break, and I'll set the leaving for school stuff in motion. All right, almost didn't make it back in time. Shoo, actually, I didn't make it back in time. I mean, I guess we can be honest about that. But here we are, and ready to start again. And just making sure the kids are healthy and take their vitamins. You'll find your favorite beverages in the refrigerator, and that'll help you supplement your nutrition with otherwise tasteless vitamin pills. Okay, just thought everybody should know what was going on here. And departure number 2 begins with the waking of the elder boy. Okay, so now back to the New York Times improperly reported blockbuster about Kushner's security clearance, and into our second hour on this. I don't know how long this is going to go. Mr. Trump's precise language. We left off before the break, because we're making this all about precision of language here. Mr. Trump's precise language to Mr. Kelly about Mr. Kushner's clearance in their direct conversation remains unclear. There you have it. Okay, so it remains unclear, and I think that's like the crux of the issue. And so I suppose this is worth having. It certainly gives me something to talk about. And I'm sure that in the New York Times newsroom, they said, well, if we wait for it to become clear, if we develop it to the point that it becomes clear. Well, for one thing, we're doing an investigator's job for them, and we don't really need to wait to do that. And 2, we'll be scooped. So let's put all the imprecise language out there up at the top, because it's very sensational. And then acknowledge that we understand the imprecision of the language down somewhere at the bottom half of the article, so that we're covered and we don't end up looking like we don't know what we're talking about on Kagro in the morning. But it's too late, because it already looks like you don't know what you're talking about, because I don't know what I'm talking about. I didn't read all the way through the article yet. I'm reading it live. But this is why you should put this stuff up at the top. Cover your ass at the beginning. Why not? Anyway, Mr. Trump's precise language to Mr. Kelly about Mr. Kushner's clearance in their direct conversation remains unclear. 2 of the people familiar with Mr. Trump's discussions with Mr. Kelly said that they say Mr. too often. They said that there might be different interpretations of what the president said. That's one thing that's always true. But Mr. Kelly believed it was an order, according to two people familiar with his thinking. That's not out of keeping, of course, with what we learned from Michael Cohen the other day, and really what everybody understands to be the case with all people who give orders or who, have employees that are directly responsible to them. But Michael Cohen, of course, describing the manner in which Trump often would give his orders, often with a clear understanding that there were issues with his, there were potential issues if he were the one giving away, giving the direct order. And so there were winks and the opposites, lots of influence blocking and or reverse psychology in giving the orders. I'm not saying that you should strangle him into unconsciousness and then cut him up with a bone saw, but there are bone saws to be had if necessary. And really, once you're packing a garrote, you might as well just put a bone saw in the bag too. After which I would note, you're not flying commercials, so security isn't going to find the bone saw. So you're in the clear as far as that's concerned. If you were to find that the guy needed immediate emergency orthopedic surgery or some such thing, I'm just saying, I don't know why you would bring such a bone saw, but if you're going to bring a saw, bring a good one. That's all I'm saying. So lots of wink possibilities in here, I guess. But also he's actually kind of dumb, so I don't know how well he covered his tracks. But I'm just saying that Kelly, it sounds like people who know Kelly say that Kelly's description of what happened is not at all dissimilar to what Cohen says happened when he interacted with Trump. So that would be corroborating evidence. Circumstantial, to be sure, but corroborating nonetheless. And evidence, nonetheless. Okay, so continuing on. Mr. Trump was definitive in his statements to the Times in the January interview. And this is the difference, I think, between Abby Lowell and Kelly and others like them who care about such things and care about reputations, and Trump, who simply says, I think it may even be that he notices and understands that when you parse like that, it's readily, it's easy to see. It's spotted quickly by people who know what they're doing and some people who don't. So why bother with that? Just go with the unequivocal denial. And, if you get caught up in any trouble about it and you find yourself in court, you just say, I don't recall doing that. They learned that from the Reagan administration officials and other high-profile criminal prosecutions in which I don't recall goes a long way. So Trump was definitive in his statements to the Times in the January interview, and the Times printed them, essentially no questions asked, but I'm sure they were stroking their chins afterwards. I was never involved with the security. And I stopped there because that's the end of the quote. And this is another problem. I mean, look at this construction. And it might just be that he used the wrong word, so they end up having to end the quote there. But this is it. Quote, I was never involved with the security, unquote. And then more. Here, I don't know, this is very difficult to read with my mind racing in 5 different directions with this. You could absolutely envision Donald Trump making that the entirety of the statement. I was never involved with the security. I don't do the security. Clearances, you mean, sir? I don't know. Whatever. I'm just not going to say the next word for whatever reason. And sometimes it's my English syntax is a garbled mess. I don't do the security. Let's do the nuclear. Why don't we do a bipartisan? Right? He does this sort of thing all the time. But it might also be, I guess, crazy like a fox style stuff. Like if I don't say clearances specifically, then I'm off the hook, right? If they find out I meddled in the security clearances, it's been made clear to me that I'm in huge trouble, either politically or legally or both. It's really just politically, but I don't want that either. So don't say that. So what do you say? I've 100%. I am never involved in the security. And then they do the favor of adding the rest of the sentence that they thought was implied there, because this is the context of the response. The question I asked you is, sir, were you ever involved in the security clearances for Mr. Kushner? Answer. This is the part on the record. You can quote me. I was never involved with the security. Now, on background, clearances for Mr. Kushner, the president said. He just never says the word. I am not involved with the security. That is to say, I don't wear an earpiece. I'm not a Secret Service agent. I'm not involved in security clearances for Kushner. I am involved in security clearances for Kushner, but what I said was I'm never involved with the security, which I was thinking you were asking me, did I provide security at the Altamont Speedway during the, Rolling Stones concert? No. I did not do that. But on the other hand, security clearances for Kushner, I did do that, but I never said I didn't. I said I was never involved with the security. Unquote. Clearances for Mr. Kushner, the president said. That's the way it reads in the New York Times. Thanks for doing the work for him. I mean, I don't know what the hell else they're going to do. They bring I was never involved with the security to their editors, and their editors say, you mean, it's the security clearances, right? Yeah. But in your notes, it doesn't say clearances. Yeah, he never said the word clearances at that point. Listen to the tape. I was never involved with the security. Exchange Commission, right? What does he mean there? He must mean clear. All right. In order to construct a coherent sentence out of this and not be laughed at by the journalistic community for lacking basic English skills, we have to add the rest of the sentence. So now we have, I was never involved with the security clearances for Mr. Kushner, the president said, but he didn't say that. Now, quote, I know that there was issues back and forth about security for numerous people, actually. Not many people know that, actually. But I don't want to get involved in that stuff, unquote. So two quotes that don't really mean anything. I was never involved with the security. I know that there was issues back and forth about security for numerous people, actually. Or numerous people, actually. Like not just Jared. Lots of people have problems. And that's true, they do, because a lot of them are crooks, and you love crooks. But I don't want to get involved in that stuff. I did, but I didn't want to. See, I mean, even that. And do I think it's consciously crafted? Yeah, sometimes I really do. I don't think he's very skilled at it, but, unless the skill is knowing that others are going to fill in the blanks, but I don't even want to credit him with that. A recent report by NBC revealed that Mr. Klein, remember him, had overruled 2 career security specialists, that is to say, the people who work for multiple administrations, both Democratic and Republican, and therefore are supposed to be trustworthy and without outside motivation, and they're the people who absolve the president of the burden of A, doing the work, and B, living with the possible political repercussions of the work. So Klein tells 2 of those people that who had rejected Mr. Kushner's application based on the FBI's concerns, that he's overruling them. A senior administration official confirmed the details laid out in the NBC report. Mr. Klein was acting on the directive sent down by the president, one of the people familiar with the matter said. So there's the answer. Can you straighten this out? Or, Kelly, I order you to grant the security clearance. Were you, in fact, ordered to grant the security clearance? No, I was ordered to tell Mr. Klein that he was under orders from the president to grant the security clearances. Can you straighten this out? No, I can't, but you can. You need to tell Mr. Klein to overrule those people. Well, if I tell Mr. Klein to overrule those people, there's going to be a record that says I said that. So why don't you say it? And I'll say I never said it. And you can say something else. You can say that you were ordered to grant the clearances. And then when you're questioned about that, you can say, no, I wasn't ordered to grant them. I was ordered to tell someone else to grant them. I misstated it in my record for the file. Maybe. The day that Mr. Lowell described, that's Abby Lowell, the lawyer who knows how to parse his words. The day that Mr. Lowell described Mr. Kushner's process as having gone through normal routes. They are watching, I think. Aides to Mr. Kushner had asked White House officials to deliver a statement from Mr. Kelly supporting what Mr. Lowell had said. But Mr. Kelly refused to do so, according to a person with knowledge of the events. Now we have reached the end of the article, and we are at that point at which we find out who else contributed to the reporting. And the answer is Matthew Rosenberg, who I don't know, Charlie Savage, who I do, and Nicholas Fandos, who I also don't know. Now, Matthew Rosenberg and Nicholas Fandos I probably do know and have read their articles before, but I'm terrible with names. Charlie Savage I know for sure. Now, Charlie Savage, not likely to make these mistakes, and I feel like his contribution to the reporting came in at the end here when we started to think, now it's beginning to look like the Times reporters are on to the parsing. And I give credit to that for Charlie Savage. That is probably unfair. For all I know, Nicholas Fandos is the one who did that. Or Mike Schmidt, for all I know, was somehow able to work this out. Armando thinks there's no way, I'm sure, that Mike Schmidt did it. But I have a soft spot for Mike Schmidt because I'm not saying he deserves it. I'm saying I have it because he went to Lafayette College and so did I. Not at the same time, and I had no idea that he did that, and I've never met Michael Schmidt, and I got no idea why I ever would, but as it turns out, he went to Lafayette College, and I think all the smart people go there. So how's that? I don't know who worked this out. Also, I could have said it was Annie Carney. She could be the secret genius in all this, and I'm guessing incorrectly that she's not because that sounds like a little girl's name or something, Annie Carney. That's very, cute with the I at the end of Carney. But I'm exhibiting gender bias, and she's a secret genius. I don't know. I'm not sure who did this. I don't know if any of them did it. This may all still be a coincidence, but it did seem like toward the end that they were catching on. Now, let me just read that last paragraph again, because I think that's important to figuring out whether they really do know what's going on here or not. So, Klein overrules 2 security specialists. Klein says, one of the people familiar with the matter said that Klein was acting on the directive sent down by the president. That's the one, I guess, memorialized in the file in the contemporaneous memo written by Kelly. And the day that Abby Lowell, Kushner's lawyer, the day that Abby Lowell, and it's only one day, that also I think settles that question about whether he said it twice, that very crafty statement from Abby Lowell that said that Kushner went through the normal process, period, end of sentence, end of statement, but doesn't discuss what happened after the normal process ended in a rejection. So, the day Lowell says that, aides to Mr. Kushner asked White House officials, I'm not sure who, to deliver a statement. Can you get the chief of staff, Kelly, to deliver a statement supporting what Abby Lowell just said, that Kushner went through the normal process, and Kelly, for whatever reason, says either, no, that's not what happened. He didn't go through the normal process, thinking oh, well, there was 2/3 of the process not described in that statement. And what happened in the case in chief here is that the process was way outside of normal. Or he simply says, it's not my job to help Kushner's lawyer do his. Kushner's lawyer has given a perfectly adequate statement for someone in the role of Kushner's lawyer. I'm not Kushner's lawyer. That's it. That's all that's the end of my role in all this. Oh, I don't need to support that. It's true. It can stand on its own, but it conceals the rest of the truth. And I just wrote a memo to the file about that. So no, I'm not going to, do anything to undermine my own memo to the file. So there you go. That's, I think, what happened there. And I'm glad we got to read through this in such excruciating detail. There really is no other show that would allow itself to do that. And of course we do, because I don't have anybody here to help me and say, stop, you've been on this article for like an hour and a half. You got to cut it out. No one cares anymore. I flatter myself to think that maybe you do, and that you find the show unique. And so I hope that that's the case. And one day I will coordinate that with a broader appeal for further funding. Although, quite honestly, most of you who are listening live, and if you're listening to the podcast and you've hung in this long, it's probably because I've already sold you and you are a supporter of the show. And I thank you for it. And there are an awful lot of you, and I do appreciate it. And it being, of course, the middle of tax season, I am going over in great detail exactly how many of you have generously contributed and how much. So it's a good time to say thank you, and a bad time probably to say, oh, I realized along the way just recently that there is another great mechanism for giving money. And it's a nice one. It seems like fun, and I don't understand it yet exactly. But those of you who listen on Radio Public, for those of you listening on the Radio Public app, there is an, as yet on this show, unpromoted channel for contributing more money in the form of what Radio Public is calling tips, which, makes it easy to understand. And it's a mechanism for giving a one-time, or as many times as you want, but it's not a recurring thing. One-time payment of, whatever you want, I guess. I don't know what dollar amounts you're allowed to do, but it's as close to a micro payment system as they've come up with yet, except that the payments aren't micro. But the idea being, I listened to this podcast today on the Radio Public platform, and I like it, and I'm going to hit this button that says tip the podcaster, and you can send a message to them, but also money. And it goes through whatever, Stripe or whatever it is. It does all the back-end credit card payments for almost everybody online, and I get a nice email, although I don't think it designates who it came from most times, but it says, you got a tip for your show, and it was $5, $10, $1. It's very nice, and I don't know how to promote it properly. I have to go through their tutorial to understand how it works on their app and on their platform. But I think it's visible to a relatively small section of our audience, because I still don't think most people listen on the Radio Public app. A lot of people listen via Radio Public, but not on their phones on the Radio Public app, which I think is where all this stuff resides. Anyway, it was nice, and somebody sent me a nice tip the other day, and it reminded me that this thing exists. And so if you happen to be listening or ever thought of switching over to the Radio Public app, that's another fun reason to try it out. It seems to be doing a pretty good job. I think it's delivering for most people who choose to listen that way. And of course, when you listen to the entirety of the program or some significant portion of it on the Radio Public app, that also counts towards the paid listens program that they have, that Radio Public actually makes a micro payment for, I think in the neighborhood of 20 cents for paid listens. If you simply download the app and listen to the show that way, then it throws 20 cents in the kitty, and I eventually get that. And if lots of you do it over a long period of time, it makes a big difference. That's not a news story, though. Other news stories await, and I knew there was one, at least, that I thought might make an interesting segue. Now we'll see if I can remember which one it is and why. Coulda, shoulda made a note to myself about that one, and I don't think that I did. What was it? I don't know. Anyway, maybe it was this one. Huffington Post, which is not the Huffington Post anymore, HuffPost, has this piece. I now suspect this is the one I meant to go to. Daniel Marans and Paul Blumenthal put together. And I think, auto-playing ad. Oh, it's for Secret. Everybody, it's strong enough for a man but made for a woman. Go out and get it. I don't know. I'll help out the HuffPost with that. I think they might make more money you got to go click on it, right? Anyway, never mind. This appears to be possible corroborating evidence for our discussion yesterday. Yes, this must have been it. The transition I was thinking of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's questioning of Michael Cohen. It was all speculation yesterday, and I don't know. For all I know, Daniel Marans and Paul Blumenthal were listening to the show and said, "Oh, that's an interesting take. We should write that up." But I have a feeling that if they did, they would say, maybe quote me or something and throw it in there to be nice, to show that the speculation came from me. But I think what probably happened was, no, they don't listen to the show. They came to the same conclusion independently, and good for them because they're smart reporters, I guess. I think they are. Oh, also a possibility, because I haven't read this article yet, I am imagining that they're coming to the same conclusion because it's the conclusion I came to, and so everybody's going to come to that conclusion. It could be a totally different one. But in my quick skim of the article, I thought this might be helpful addition to what we speculated yesterday. Behind Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's masterful interrogation of Michael Cohen, the questions that won the New York Congresswoman praise were the combined product of committee staff expertise, collaboration, and oratory skills. So, lots from her, lots from others, but I was watching, actually, she spent a good portion of the day yesterday tweeting about how awesome she was, which, okay, she's a pretty awesome person to have achieved what she's achieved here, and whatever, but yeah, I don't follow her, but I see a lot of people that I know do follow her, so a lot of things getting retweeted from her. Maybe a fuller examination of the record shows that she gave lots of credit to staff, either committee staff or otherwise. But she was making an interesting point yesterday of saying, people are like, how could you possibly have done such a good job asking those questions? And these are the same people who are looking for reasons to believe that I couldn't possibly have put that together on my own, who were yesterday laughing and pointing and saying I was an idiot for paying my staff a living wage. There was a mini hubbub of a story the other day that apparently starting salaries in her office were $52,000, which is great. And the pushback being, oh, say socialist, she's passing out other people's money like it's candy. The truth of the matter is, of course, every member's office has a budget, an overall budget, and you can spend it as you see fit, more or less. I don't know whether they really break it down, this much is the cap for salary and this much is the cap for office supplies or, office rental for district offices. I don't know whether they really do that or not, but there is an overall budgetary cap, and there are maximum salaries that you can pay to staff too. But she basically made the choice that, we'll cut back in other areas and give people a living wage for the Washington, D.C. area. And $52,000 may be more than is necessary, but, it's pretty generous. I can tell you, a million years ago when I worked on Capitol Hill, that was like a senior-ish level salary, not, top level, but mid to senior. And that most people who were starting out, even in a legislative capacity in Congress, were working, getting salaries in the 20s. I'm sure that's up in the 30s, possibly in the 40s now. But anyway, shocker that well-paid staff who are working for somebody they believe in could possibly put together such a good line of questioning and do such a good job for their boss. Maybe it's a sign of things to come. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you, but remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And it's just occurred to me that there was at least one other story that I actually was thinking of and thinking we could segue to by way of expanding on an earlier point. And this one wasn't it, but this is one of, it's not it, but I think there's one of two at the very least. And so, let's see. Let's continue, or begin with this one. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went viral again yesterday. The piece begins. This time it wasn't because of her dancing skills or an epic Twitter clapback, as the kids say, but thanks to her sharp questioning of Michael Cohen at the House Oversight Committee hearing on Wednesday. The freshman New York Congresswoman, quote, expertly laid a trap, unquote, to get President Donald Trump's tax returns and, quote, won, unquote, I gotta be careful where the quotes start and end, won the Cohen hearing, according to two raving press accounts. One in Mother Jones for expertly laid a trap, and won the Cohen hearing, coming from the New York Times piece. I don't know who said it, but just by way of reference. Ocasio-Cortez's testimony, it wasn't testimony, focused primarily on Trump's alleged deflation of his financial assets in order to lower his tax burden. That was good stuff. First, she zeroed in on Trump Links, a golf course in Ocasio-Cortez's district that was constructed with $127 million in city taxpayer funds. We mentioned this yesterday. The city's deal with Trump nonetheless stipulated that the Trump organization could keep all the profits it earned from the course for the first 4 years. It's a highly questionable deal. This doesn't seem to be the only time the president has benefited at the expense of the public, Ocasio-Cortez said, pivoting to the heart of the matter, whether Trump deliberately deflated the value of Trump National Golf Club in Jupiter, Florida, to lower his property tax bill. And I don't know why they limit it to that one. I think it's the case across the board. It's not exactly the same play every time, but recall that the Bedminster, New Jersey golf course also apparently is for taxation purposes in the state of New Jersey, and the new governor there might want to look into it, as designated as farmland. I think at some point they, planted, there was a law, you plant 10 trees, say, it's a tree farm. And we have this area where we have, 3 goats that graze to keep the grass short. Therefore, we're a farm, and there are farm breaks, all over the tax code. And so this multi-million-dollar golf complex is taxed as though it was a family farm or something to that effect. I'm sure that that's not a totally accurate statement of exactly how the taxes are handled. But the point is that it's of commonplace Trump tactic not only to devalue assets for tax time and inflate the value of assets when it comes time for loans, but he plays games with the local property tax bills everywhere, not just the Trump National Golf Club in Jupiter, and he plays with available subsidies everywhere, not just in Trump links in New York City. So, anyway, back to the story. To your knowledge, was the president interested in lowering his local real estate tax bills? She asked. Yes, Cohen responded. Actually, I thought that was like the weakest of the questions because, of course, I mean, to your knowledge, isn't everybody interested in lowering your real estate tax bills? Yes. So not a tough one. It's just that Trump takes it to an extreme. He cheats. I'm interested in lowering them, but if I have to cheat to do it, no. But if it's legit, then yes. And, I mean, I guess everybody's definition of legitimate changes. If I legitimately have those goats. I mean, they are there. And I don't know who wrote the law that said 3 goats is enough to get a farm designation. That's dumb. But I got myself 3 goats because I didn't get 4. I got 3. Is that legitimate? I don't really consider it legitimate, but there it is. But everybody wants to lower their real estate bills, real estate tax, or any tax bills. And Trump was pretty open about that in the debates. I lower my bills or I don't pay taxes because you would have squandered it. I mean, he's wrong, but he was open about it in a way. Ocasio-Cortez confirmed from Cohen that obtaining Trump's federal and state tax returns would help ascertain the extent of his tax evasion efforts. I mean, but I think we knew that. That's why even prior to Cohen's testimony, people have said we should get that guy's tax returns. But okay, she laid it out very clearly. It was nice. And she also identified other individuals, such as Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, who could testify about Trump's practices prior to Cohen's arrival in the organization. Again, I'm glad it was laid out when people were watching, but, Armando has said Alan Weisselberg knows this, and everybody has known that for a long time. I say everybody, I mean you, I mean me, I don't mean everybody. There really are people who pay no attention, and maybe because Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was the one asking that question and it goes viral because she did it, more people will know. She did a great job. Don't misunderstand me. Notwithstanding her impressive performance, the secret to Ocasio-Cortez's success was remarkably prosaic. I'm having a hard time reading today. A team effort. I suspected as much, and because most good efforts are team efforts, informed by the desire to uncover the truth for the public's benefit, according to staff. And now a quote. If there was one person that wasn't involved in this question preparation and committee preparation, it wouldn't have been as successful as it was, unquote, said Clarissa Reynoso, Ocasio-Cortez's chief legislative correspondent, who supervised the Congresswoman's preparation for the hearing. Let me pause for a second there. Granted that the minimum starting salary in her office, which is great, is the very good living wage of $52,000. A legislative correspondent, even the chief legislative correspondent typically is a designation for a starting level legislative aide, usually with a bachelor's degree, the job description is what it sounds like. You might not guess that that's the name they give to it, but legislative correspondent is chiefly responsible for answering constituent mail about legislative issues. The typical office will have a team of, 2, 3, perhaps more legislative correspondents, often paid, near minimal salary, barely more than you might pay for the ultimate open starting levels of office assistants or schedulers who really should be paid more because they really handle a lot more, or receptionists, whatever. Legislative correspondent basically writes constituent email. You write about Medicare for all, and they match you up with the right form letter that says thank you for blah, blah, blah. We totally support that. In fact, we're in favor of single-payer health care, et cetera. Or they write about abortion and they say, we actually disagree with you and think that it should be, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's the legislative correspondence job. Sometimes the next level up typically is legislative assistant, who is that's a person who very often will track legislation making its way through the Congress and will be the person responsible for saying, to the congressman, today's votes are on my issue, and I've read this bill or the summary of this bill and think this is where we ought to be on this thing. And sometimes you recommend how to vote on things when it's not a major issue of close concern necessarily to the member. They when they're talking about stuff that's relevant to their committee work, they have a legislative assistant that's very often dedicated to the committee issues and will attend committee hearings with them and work with committee staff on really serious crafting of legislation and tracking bills and getting ready for hearings. Not all offices are structured exactly the same way, but and it may be that the chief legislative correspondent fills many roles because they pay so much, more than other offices do. They don't have the budget for that many people, and maybe in exchange for your $52,000, you got to wear a lot of hats. But it would be unusual in most offices for a legislative correspondent, chief or otherwise, to participate in the crafting of committee hearing questions. But if she did, and it sounds like everybody had a hand in it, that's great. What a fun office to work in, because one of the other horrible things about working on Capitol Hill is the really good stuff, the fun stuff, the things you thought you were going to Capitol Hill to work on are kept out of the hands of legislative correspondents and very jealously guarded by committee staff and more senior staff. So it's great that they had a hand in that. And, of course, it's good to have a bunch of skilled eyes on this material, and I guess you do get a better result when everybody has a hand in it. Working alongside Intergovernmental Affairs Chief Randy Abreu, Reynoso began her research on Cohen last Thursday when the staff learned the date of Cohen's committee testimony. I suspect that she knew a great deal about Michael Cohen and who he was before then, I hope, but I don't see how she could. She's probably well read in the news like the rest of us. The professional staff of the House Committee on Oversight and Reform, separate from her personal office staff, there's dedicated committee staff that work for Elijah Cummings, basically. That staff worked nonstop last weekend to draft a list of 35 questions that each Democrat on the panel could choose from and put their own stamp on. Thank you, Daniel Marins and Paul Blumenthal, for doing the actual reporting necessary to stand behind my stupid speculation from yesterday. But it wasn't that stupid, it turns out. But, could I have done that? Yeah. Am I a reporter, though? No. But these guys are. Thank you for doing it. Honestly. This lays it out. Now we know we didn't waste our time yesterday. On Tuesday, after conferring with Ocasio-Cortez, Reynoso met with committee staff to select a question. She chose to pursue the line of inquiry about Trump's efforts to devalue golf course properties to lower his taxes, because they have one in or near their district, right? It makes sense. If we didn't ask those questions, we wouldn't be doing an injustice for the American people, Reynoso explained. We wouldn't be doing our jobs. P.S. Most legislative correspondents in other offices, traditionally structured offices, would probably find, if it wasn't explained to them ahead of time explicitly, it would be explained very clearly afterwards. And I don't know that it wasn't being explained right to her today, but you are not, under any circumstances, as legislative correspondent, chief or otherwise, authorized to speak to the press on the record on behalf of our office. That's not done. But they trust her. That's great. This is awesome. It might be a well-functioning team, well-paid and well-functioning. What do you think about that? They do things differently over there. Good. If we didn't ask these questions, we would be doing an injustice for the American people. We wouldn't be doing our jobs. She's thinking in broad terms, and she's thinking about her constituents, Reynoso added. That's what you saw in terms of the Bronx golf course. It may also be possible that the chief legislative correspondent wears the hat of press secretary in that office, too, in which case she would be authorized to speak to the press. I don't know. I think this is really nice. It can be dangerous, and sometimes you run into problems. The minute she misstates something, they'll say, all right, let's reevaluate the process we have here. But right now, things are wide open. And so far, no mistakes. The original question drafted by committee staff only mentioned Trump's Jupiter golf course. Abreu, who grew up in the Bronx's Fordham neighborhood just outside... Fordham? What do you know? Outside Ocasio-Cortez's district, suggested that they add a reference to Trump links. I mentioned Fordham because isn't that is that the school that he went to? I confused them before, right? Fordham and Hofstra, right? I think I got them mixed up last time. And Trump's in the news for leaning on whatever school it was that he went to for the first 2 years before he transferred to Penn, not to release his transcripts. All right, forget it. It's there. You know it already. So Abreu grew up in the neighborhood and said, let's add the reference to Trump links. The taxpayer-funded golf course in an affluent enclave of New York's otherwise working-class 14th congressional district was the perfect emblem of the kind of greed and cronyism Ocasio-Cortez is committed to combating, according to Abreu. It's always been a good representation of the income inequality in the Bronx, he recalled. And Trump links' proximity to the Bronx Whitestone Bridge, which connects the Bronx part of Ocasio-Cortez's district to the section in Queens, means that Ocasio-Cortez and her staff indeed see it regularly in the course, no pun intended, of their travels in the district, which Ocasio-Cortez was sure to highlight. I drive past it every day on my drive from the Bronx to Queens, Ocasio-Cortez noted in the course, again, of questioning Cohen. Reynoso and Abreu drafted text of the question for Ocasio-Cortez, complete with reference to supportive articles from the Washington Post and the New York Times. Ocasio-Cortez edited the copy with her own flourishes and ad-libbed some of the delivery to make it as accessible as possible to the ordinary viewer. Very good. She worded the question in a way better to suit her voice, Reynoso said. She's also a very unique Congress member in that you can completely trust her to basically succeed in asking the question that Democratic committee staff wanted her to ask. Very true, Greg. Well described. Since Ocasio-Cortez was one of the last Oversight Committee members to question Cohen, committee staff were also in constant real-time communication with Reynoso to make sure Ocasio-Cortez got a chance to follow up on questions for which other members had not received complete answers. As a result, Ocasio-Cortez was able to pick up a line of questioning from Representative Peter Welch of Vermont about the existence and whereabouts of a, quote, treasure trove of incriminating documents that American Media Incorporated CEO and National Enquirer publisher David Pecker had allegedly assembled on Trump's critics. Cohen confirmed that Pecker, Barry Levine, and Dylan Howard would know about whether the trove still exists, laying the groundwork for the committee to potentially subpoena those three individuals. In framing her question about Trump's devaluation of assets for tax purposes, Ocasio-Cortez also nodded briefly to questions from fellow Democratic Representative Lacey Clay of Missouri about instances in which Trump inflated his assets in order to obtain loans from Deutsche Bank. She confirmed from Cohen that Trump had provided inflated asset assessments to an insurance company in the past. We had to make sure we finished what other people started, Reynoso said. In less than 2 months as a member of Congress, Ocasio-Cortez's interrogations as both a member of the Oversight Committee and the Financial Services Committee, which will end up looking into that Deutsche Bank situation, I think, have already achieved national renown, rare for a member of Congress. She produced viral video moments in committee hearings on pharmaceutical prices and campaign finance reform and made a splash when she brought attention to racial inequality in the legal marijuana industry. Ocasio-Cortez's star power has undoubtedly contributed to the exposure her committee exchanges have gotten. At age 29, she's the youngest woman ever to serve in Congress, and as a Democratic socialist who unseated one of the House's most powerful Democrats, who, by the way, would have produced 0 of these viral moments. The Congresswoman, I added that, by the way, not these guys in HuffPost. Don't blame them. The Congresswoman is an object of extraordinary fascination for the media, to put it mildly. One advantage Ocasio-Cortez has over some colleagues is that she consistently attends even the most mundane committee hearings, since she does not spend any of her day calling donors for money. I did see this being sent around on Twitter. Small objection there. Her online presence is strong enough that she has chosen to rely on it exclusively to raise contributions in smaller increments. I would say that though it is the case that she'll have more time on her hands because she doesn't do call time, and that is the case that occasionally members will skip less important committee hearings less important to them, in order to do that. And, it is a dereliction of duty in some sense. It's not the overwhelming, it's not overwhelmingly the explanation, or very often even the explanation for their absence from committee hearings. For the most part, they are mundane, they are boring, they are the same questions being asked over and over again, and very few hearings have the allure of the Cohen hearings yesterday or Wednesday. But there are a million things going on, and I would venture to say, by the way, that probably upwards of 50% of members' absences, either for the entirety of a hearing or for major portions or even minor portions of a hearing, has to do with their having opposing hearings scheduled. They're on multiple committees, and very often they have to move from one hearing to another. They're scheduled at the same time. There are also, of course, other demands of the office, meetings that they take with constituents or lobbyists, for that matter, or with staff that take them away. I would say probably, I don't know, I couldn't really guess for you. It depends on the member and what they're up to. But my experience was it was very rarely fundraising call time, particularly in late February, immediately following an election. Unless they were trying to retire some major debt, but usually not fundraising call time that was taking people away from committee hearings. Sometimes it was just, this hearing is stupid and I got nothing better to do, but I'm going to go back to the office and read papers and watch C-SPAN and catch up on the news and talk to the staff a little bit. But it's not like every member who's absent from a hearing is always to be found fundraising and making fundraising calls. It's a large part of the day, a large part of life, but not necessarily a large part of every day at this stage of the game. Anyway, Reynoso and Abreu insist that her knack for clever questioning, which is a marked contrast with other members' preference for grandstanding, is ultimately rooted in a commitment to moving the needle for her constituents. She's an organizer, and you can see that in her questions. She's asking questions that advocates need to know, Reynoso said. That is unique amongst most members. Of course, those questions were offered to others, and some picked them up and some didn't. But she did a great job with it, but I think some good corroborating reporting from these guys here, and I totally appreciate it. There is at least one more thing that I wanted to share with you in the time we have left. It's too little to share the entirety of the article I was thinking of, but I wanted to note on at least one other subject here. The reporting on Trump's trip to Hanoi, where he wasted time with Kim Jong-un and came away with no deal, et cetera, et cetera. There was at least one weird and puzzling outcome. Which is a subset of the weird and puzzling examples of Trump's almost veneration of Kim Jong-un. I mean, the praise he lavishes on this guy is unbelievable. But among the more upsetting pieces of fallout from this posturing that he's doing is that there's been this sudden abandonment of the storyline of the horrors that the North Koreans allegedly inflicted on American captive Otto Warmbier. And it's a weird thing. I mean, it's weird to watch because, of course, we were all told, oh my God, they tortured him to death. He came back and he died days later because the brutal, vicious, awful, communist, repressive regime in North Korea, all of which is true, tortured him to death, essentially. They tortured him to the point where he fell into a coma and was brain damaged, and he came home and died. When they finally agreed to release him, he was on death's door, and they released him in the hopes that, American, I don't know what their hopes were. Maybe they thought American medicine would be able to save him or whatever. I don't know what the deal was. But then Trump, has done a 180 on Kim Jong-un. Everyone has seen that, and he's explained it only by saying he writes the most beautiful letters and we fell in love. So I was wondering, well, what would be the response to, this whole reversal on Kim Jong-un being an evil guy and turning into, I love him, he's fantastic, and everyone misunderstands it. Totally misunderstood guy, by the way. That's the Saturday Night Live take on it. But to top it all off, of course, he's asked about that following their meeting, and Trump actually gives the same dumb thing that he said about everything. Putin says he didn't interfere in the elections, and I believe him. Who else did he do this to? I can't even remember who else. So-and-so says they didn't da-da-da, and I believe them. And now Kim Jong-un says that he didn't have anything to do with it and didn't know about it, and he's really sorry about the whole thing with Otto Warmbier, and I believe him. And I was wondering, how does that go over with people who dedicated a lot of time to bolstering the narrative that Kim Jong-un is an evil, brutal, repressive dictator and ordered the torture of this American? One answer is in the Washington Post today. Otto Warmbier's family responds to Trump's defense of Kim Jong-un, saying Kim's evil regime is responsible for their son's death. That's like what I would have expected, but I was curious, and I will read through it on my own afterwards over the weekend. I recommend you do too. If you're curious like me, how do you respond? The Warmbier family are Republicans, and they were pretty big Trump boosters for getting their son home, despite the fact that he didn't live very long. They blamed that on Kim Jong-un, and, by rights, wouldn't they ordinarily, if they were ordinary people, think we are being deeply betrayed by Donald Trump here? Horribly betrayed. And they probably do feel that way. And that's not explained away by this other article, which I would love to read for you at some time, but we definitely don't have time for this, but I have to hand this one over to you. I saw Greg tweet it around yesterday, and I'm surprised we didn't get a chance. We didn't discuss it a little more online, but maybe we'll discuss it over the weekend and on Monday, perhaps on the air. But there is a piece here of all places, GQ. Why GQ? I don't know. But sometimes, occasionally, they just get these stories, and, like anything, good reporters can be found anywhere. Teen Vogue, for instance. GQ has a story by Doug Bach-Clark, with whom I am not familiar. But it was a really, I thought, fantastic story. At the end, I'm not sure what to believe. The Untold Story of Otto Warmbier, American Hostage. And I'll just read you that's the title and the subheader here. President Trump hailed him as a catalyst of the summit with Kim Jong-un. But what happened to Warmbier, the American college student who was sent home brain damaged from North Korea, is even more shocking than anyone knew. And there's no way to fairly summarize everything that's in this article that quickly. But basically, the premise of this article is that it may in fact be true that Kim Jong-un didn't mean to do this and was genuinely sorry, and may never actually have physically tortured Otto Warmbier, though I guess the article still leaves wide open the quite real possibility, and in fact the near certainty, that he was tortured mentally. The isolation and the uncertainty of your ever surviving your incarceration in North Korea has apparently been a huge problem. But apparently the historical record on North Korean detention of Americans and Western prisoners, no matter for what reason they're taken, with the possible exception of military prisoners that were taken even after the cessation of the Korean War hostilities. It has been one of very careful and very delicate treatment. Physical abuse is historically has almost never been inflicted on Western and American prisoners. The mental state also, though, highly questionable, and at least one or two people who have been held there for a great deal of time and then freed nonetheless came home and committed suicide, allegedly blamed on their post-traumatic stress syndrome. But this article posits that same stress of the detention may have led Otto Warmbier to attempt suicide while he was in North Korean custody, and that's what put him in a coma, and that's what inflicted the brain damage, and that they actually cared for him for a considerable amount of time, very, very carefully and very, very well, considering the fact that he had fallen into a coma because of attempted suicide. I mean, physically well treated. I don't know if that's worth anything, but the whole premise is that the Americans are the ones who beat the drums for insisting that he had been physically tortured as a prelude to a possible war with North Korea when that was still in the offing.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Anyway, I highly recommend the article to you, and in fact, I highly recommend staying tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which will bring you a number of other interesting stories, including the latest on the My Pillow guy who told the CPAC Incel General Assembly, oh, Justice, that Trump's the greatest president in history because he was chosen by God.